Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. I'm super excited today because we've gotten access, or rather a sneak peek, at one of the new rune words that will be available in ladder. We got a sneak peek at some of the other ones, which was the pattern rune word and the sneak peeked you at the rune word, and the plague rune word. Both the pattern and the plague rune word were kind of snuck to us early. And Dobrunsky apparently got a sneak peek directly from the developers about a new rune word that's being added into ladder, and that is Unbending Will. Unbending Will is a 6-socket sword-only rune word, which means that it will most likely only be able to be created in phase blades and Colossus blades. Those are really the only two choices. The highest rune in this particular recipe, I believe, is the Foul or the Io, which, if I remember correctly, the Foul rune is level 40. I want to say level 41. So the Foul rune is the highest level rune in this particular rune word, which means that the rune word is only level 41, which is kind of interesting. It makes it a mid-tier rune, which can theoretically be used on a lot of characters. I definitely like this taunt, and the taunt is something that I think is really going to make or break this rune word for you. Because if you are a character who does not want to get beat down on a regular basis, you might not want to use this rune word. And I have a feeling this rune word was specifically made for the Barbarian mercenary, to give the Barbarian mercenary a taunt, which essentially makes him more useful. And as we go over this rune word, I'm sure we will find out that it is really nice for a Barbarian merc. So, 6 sockets, Foul Io Ith Eld El Hel. This particular rune word is relatively cheap as well, and I think it's important to note that the most expensive rune words in this are the Foul and Io. And in my travels, I have come across quite a few Fouls, and also Foul runes tend not to have very good uses. So in general, I think this is a relatively cheap level 41 rune word. The inclusion of Foul does make it a little hard to make at level 41, so if you had just hit level 41 and you are trying to make this rune word, you might not have a Foul rune sitting around, but you're probably going to have an Ith, an Eld, an El, and a Hel, and you're most likely going to have an Io, because in my experience, Io runes have been more rare in recent than the Foul. So I have 15 or 20 Io runes, and I only have about 7 or 8 Fouls. So as far as the rarity of the Io, you should have one of those by the time you get to around level 41. However, Foul runes, on the other hand, you may not, so we'll keep that in mind. So the damage on this sword doesn't look too bad. It is in a Colossus sword base, and that is 107 to 288 one-handed and 249 to 503 two-handed damage. And if we were to put this in a phase blade, let's just run the numbers on that really quickly, shall we? So we'll have to pull up a calculator, and on the calculator, we'll have to type in the base number of the phase blade, which is 31 to 35. So let's just type in 35 plus 330%, which is 150.5. So not exactly the most amazing as far as damage is concerned. We also get a couple other different forms of bonus damage on this, so we'll have to keep our eyes open on that. However, it will be very fast because phase blades are extremely fast weapons, and it also has 20% bonus to increased attack speed on it, so interesting. Alright, so right off the bat, we have level 18 Taunt with a 18% chance to cast, and that is pretty darn amazing. If you are unfamiliar with the way that Taunt works, Taunt is a reduction in the monster's attack and the monster's damage. So if they have, for instance, 100 attack rating and 100 damage, and you taunt them, depending on the level of taunt, it will reduce their damage and their attack rating equally. So in this particular case, at level 18, it is a 39% decrease, so roughly almost 40%. And that means if a monster has 100 attack rating, you're going to reduce them down to 60. If a monster has 100 damage, you're going to reduce them down to 60, which is pretty darn sweet. And this means that you are going to keep the monsters or the player alive, or the NPC alive, much easier, because the monsters that are beating on him are going to hit him for much less, and they're going to hit him much less often, which is really nice. And this also means that if you tag this along with something that has high defense, the reduction in attack rating is also going to stack with the high defense and make it very difficult for the monsters to even connect a hit at all on your mercenary, which is pretty darn cool. We also have 3 to combat skills, which is pretty nice, and I assume they put combat skills specifically because the Barbarian Merc has access to 2 combat skills, and as we know from the patch, we also know that the Barbarian Merc is going to have access to 1 Warcry now. But he also has access to 2 skills. One is Bash, and the other one is, I'm trying to remember it correctly here. One is Bash, and the other one is Stun. So Bash and Stun. So he will get a nice +3 bonus to both Bash and Stun, which is very, very nice. Bash is a knockback ability, and Stun is exactly as it states. It's a stun. We also have 20% increased attack speed, which is absolutely great, especially since you're going to be putting this in a Colossus Blade or a Phase Blade, which is going to speed him up considerably. And seeing as how we're starting to realize that this is definitely made specifically for a Barbarian Merc, that increased attack speed is certainly welcome. But keep in mind that that Taunt, I think that Taunt is going to see some use outside of Barbarian Mercs. We also have a 330% increase in damage. That is a rather large enhanced damage and is definitely going to be welcome when you put that on a rune word. I think that this particular rune word so far is turning out quite nice. I don't know if it's going to compete against other such rune words like grief and death and so forth and so on, like Breath of the Dying. But what I'm seeing right now is that it is a exceptionally good rune word for a Barbarian Mercenary, and that's how they have it set up. It also has +9 to maximum damage, which is always welcome. That is going to increase your top end a little bit. And 50 bonus to attack rating, which of course comes from the L rune, and 75% bonus damage to Undead, which is going to function very similarly to the way that Might does. It's not going to add directly onto that 330% ED, but it will cumulatively add together to any other sources of like Might, Fanaticism, Concentration, or any other types of undead damage that you may have, which is pretty cool. We also have 50 attack rating bonus to Undead, which is nice. Always nice to have a little bit of extra attack rating. 8% lifesteal, which is pretty nice. And we have, of course, no idea whether any of these things roll. So we'll have to keep that in mind. I hope that a lot of these things don't roll like the 3 combat skills. I would hope that doesn't roll back and forth. And I hope that the 330% ED doesn't have too big of a roll on the ED. But 8% lifesteal is definitely very nice to have on an item like this, especially if it is geared directly toward a mercenary. Having lifesteal on the weapon is not like the end all be all, but when you have lifesteal on the weapon, it opens up other options for you to use on your armor and helmet slots. A lot of the times people will use items specifically that have lifesteal on their helmet for a mercenary to combat the fact that there's no lifesteal on the weapon. But because there is lifesteal on the weapon, well, great. We also have Prevent Monster Heal on this item, which, as far as I remember, does not work on mercenaries unless they plan to change it. And this effect would specifically be for a player character, which almost indicates that they're putting this on there for players to use. And I do expect players to use this item, despite the fact that it seems to be very specifically geared toward a Barbarian Mercenary. I feel like this is going to be a fun tanking sword for a lot of people. We also have +10 to Strength, +10 to Vitality, both of which are very welcome stats. The +10 to Strength will, of course, help you put on your armors and your helmets, your shields, and the +10 to Vitality, of course, is very, very nice because it's going to give you HP, but it does vary depending on what character you put it on. And from what I remember, Barbarian mercenaries, or rather mercenaries in general, do not have Vitality, and unfortunately that would do nothing for the Barbarian Merc. It also has damage reduced by 8, which is a very welcome stat because it will reduce the incoming damage by 8 points. So if you are using this on a mercenary and a hit for 100 damage comes in, it's going to do only 92, which is pretty nice. We also got +1 light radius, which is, of course, I believe, from the El rune. And then we have negative 20% requirements, which comes from the Hel rune. Now, the negative 20% requirements does work on mercenaries, but you have to equip it on the mercenary, then you have to leave the game and then rejoin the game, and then the mercenary will have it equipped. I don't particularly see this being too much of an issue, but because the Phase Blade and the Colossus Blade are going to be the two preferred choices for this, we are going to be looking at a strength requirement of 189 and a dex requirement of 110. And as you can see, instead it is 88 strength or 88 dex and 152 strength. So definitely a difference there. And the Phase Blade is going to be very similar. The Phase Blade is a dex requirement of 136 and a strength requirement of 35. The strength requirement on the Phase Blade is negligible, but the dex requirement of 136 would be brought down to 20%, 108, which is not bad. So now that we've talked about the item individual stats, let's talk about the item as a whole. So what is this item good for? What is it better than? What could it replace? Who could use it? So forth and so on. Well, because it's swords only, and it seems to be specifically geared toward a barbarian, obviously barbarians could get rather a nice use out of this. The taunt ability, which I feel like we would be amiss if we didn't actually go show off, is actually kind of interesting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into a game, and we're going to play around with the taunt ability and have some fun with it so you can see how it works. And in this way, you'll have a better idea of what kind of effect the Unbending Will have on a character. Alright, so here we are on Diablo 2 Resurrected, and I have the Taunt ability on my character at level 23, which means it's negative 49%. This is going to be higher than the one on the weapon, but that's okay. It's not higher by much. It's only, 10% higher. And this skill is actually right here. Taunt is not very far down the tree, and it's actually something that people do beef up because it is a synergy of Frenzy. So if you were trying to get the maximum damage bonus on Frenzy, a lot of the times you'll have a Taunt. So you Frenzy Barbarians may know what Taunt is. Now what Taunt does specifically, as you can see, is it completely makes the monsters want to attack you over anyone else, and it also creates a place where they are just completely and utterly weak. So they have their damage reduced, they have their attack rating reduced, and it now becomes much more difficult for them to hurt you. Now there are downsides to this. The unfortunate downsides to having the Taunt ability is I'm pretty sure the Taunt ability functions as a curse. So if we are talking specifically about Taunt's place in a character's repertoire, you're not going to be able to use amp damage and decrepify with this, as well as some other curses like maybe hits blinds target and stuff like that. This curse is most likely going to overwrite any of those other abilities, and this is important because if you're considering a weapon for a barbarian mercenary, or if you're considering a weapon for a player, and you need amp damage, or you need decrepify, or you need hits blinds target, this is going to be an obstacle for you. Now, granted, they will override each other back and forth. There's absolutely no problem with them overriding each other, but they will have an issue. You will have an issue keeping the amplify damage up if you're using this sword. Now, as a whole, I really feel like this particular sword is quite an interesting thing that is being added into the game, and I absolutely love the idea of a taunt sword. This is something that I believe probably should have been in the game for a very long time, because it creates an opportunity for a taunt barbarian. if you will. And this idea of a taunt barbarian is certainly very fun, even if it is a taunt barbarian mercenary, or it could just simply be a taunt barbarian player who is role-playing the idea of being a tank. There is a lot of room in the Diablo 2 universe for a tanking character, and that is really cool in my opinion. Now, the other interesting thing about Taunt is that it also works versus ranged monsters, and it actually causes the ranged monsters to fight you in melee range. Let's see if we can find a a ranged monster. As you can see here, that ranged monster who was throwing spears at me is now compelled to fight me in melee combat. This is something that's very interesting about Taunt that allows it to utilize ranged monsters in a way that is not utilized normally. So, you know, say for instance you were fighting a Gloam, or say you were fighting a Fire Archer, or you were fighting one of the Spear Cats, and they just kind of stand there and they throw spears at you, and they don't really follow you around so much as they do just be absolutely annoying. You can use this to taunt them over. You hit them, and then they will follow you. They will specifically follow you to try and hit you, which is very, very interesting. Even monsters like, for instance, that never really move, like, say, for instance, the shamans. Let's take a look at a shaman, and I'll show you that even shamans come over to you to try and beat you up when you taunt them. And this means that that ranged monsters will be less effective under the effect of taunt, which is really, really cool. And let's see if I can find a shaman. I didn't think I would ever have an issue finding a shaman in Stonyfield, but it looks like I am. Well, what do you know? What kind of world are we living in that shamans don't exist in Stonyfield? Okay. Let's try dark wood, shall we? Oh, well, there's Mr. Treehead Bloodfist. All right, so here we go. Not only do we have a shaman, but we also have Bishibosh, which I'd like to show you. It does not work on super uniques. So this is the shaman, and when I taunt him, you'll see he comes over and he actually fights me in physical range. It is very, very useful ability, and we're talking about giving this ability to everybody, essentially, because we're putting it on a sword, which is not restricted to barbarians. We also have the Bishibosh character here, which is a super unique, and you'll notice that I cannot taunt Bishibosh, which is quite sad. Unfortunately, you cannot use this on bosses, and that means that it's not going to help your barbarian mercenary when he's fighting like Diablo or Baal or anything like that. And there's nothing really you can do about that, but it will help with the tendrils on Baal. So all in all, I'm actually quite impressed with this new rune word, and I hope that you guys enjoyed getting a sneak peek at this particular rune word, even if I did grab it from Brunsky's. But as always, as always, thank you for watching, and keep watching.